It's a pleasure to welcome everyone today to this very important session on drug discovery, drug development, and artificial intelligence. We have a fantastic panel for you. I'll introduce them in just a moment. But before we jump in and talk about our content today, I just want to extend some very special thank yous. First and foremost to the organizer of this panel, Levi Shapiro. Levi Shapiro is truly one of the world's great ambassadors for health innovation. He's the founder of mHealth Israel, one of the world's largest communities of innovators and change agents in the world. Obviously, many people listening in today are listening in from Israel, a nation known for great ideas that are really changing and saving lives around the world. I think that just from that community alone, we have about 800 listeners on a separate LinkedIn channel. And Levi, I want to acknowledge you and thank you for everything you do to make CEWIT a great success. And before I introduce our amazing panel, and you'll hear a bit about these three luminaries in just a moment, I want to extend special best wishes and appreciation to Dr. Shmuel Aniv. Dr. Aniv is the inspirational force, one of the founders behind CEWIT, and he's our conference chair. He's a professor of biomedical engineering at Stony Brook University. And if you haven't been to Stony Brook University and seen the CEWIT building, it's impressive, beyond impressive, what he and his colleagues have done to really harness the power of engineering and wireless information technology to change the future of human health. Professor Aniv, by the way, is a world-distinguished expert in the cardiovascular circulatory system. I'm sure Dr. Granowitz, one of our panelists today, will be eager to know more and learn more about the history of Dr. Aniv. He's known for his studies on blood flow through heart valves, coronary circulation, blood tissue interaction, and, of course, turbulent characteristics in occluded arteries. And as a former chair of the American Heart Association, I can attest to his work as simply life-saving. Thank you, Professor Aniv, for arranging this panel, chairing this conference, and most important, to innovation that improves, sustains people's lives. Now on to our panel, artificial intelligence, AI. It suggests some transfer of human intelligence to machines in order to augment cognitive function. In my world of medical innovation and ideas, I like to think of it as intelligence augmented. I switch sometimes the A and the I for the I and the A. We're going to find out who's right during this panel. Regardless of who you think or what you think, what letter should come first? Human or machine, machine or human, there is little doubt that artificial intelligence will drive changes and lead us to hit and discover compounds that save human lives. It will mine and tap historical information to predict clinical design pitfalls and target drugs for specific disease categories. It will help save companies billions of dollars. Ideally, it will save countless lives. Our panel of experts, in the order in which they will share and present, are Dr. Kim Branson. Dr. Branson is the Senior Vice President and Global Head of Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning at GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, Glaxo. That is among the world's largest life science companies. By the way, I'll just say that Dr. Branson, Kim, is a very early riser. He's presenting today from the West Coast. I want to thank him so much for getting up. When we were preparing for this panel, he assured me that this start time, this 10:15 start time, isn't early at all. Actually, he's sometimes on the call with colleagues in London and around the world. So he appreciated the 6 a.m. rise. He really is a luminary. He's overseeing, and CEWIT attendees pay note, he oversees a team of 50 engineers, speaks to the heart of CEWIT, obviously, the power of engineering to drive innovation. And his team is focusing on the development of AI methodology at the intersection of functional genomics and human genetics for targeted discovery and clinical applications. Now, beyond his expertise in computational drug design and disease risk prediction, you can find him at leading cafes in the Bay Area rubbing shoulders with the gurus from Apple and Twitter. He's been part of many, many companies that have been acquired by those two giants. So, Kim has unique perspective inside our industry, and of course, within the whole area of innovation and artificial intelligence. Dr. Craig Granowitz is the Chief Medical Officer of Lexicon Pharmaceuticals. Craig is a must-watch innovator in science, in biomedical science. And I've had the privilege of watching that career for a number of years. He's doing groundbreaking things. His executive roles, not just the work, his executive C-suite roles have included, in sort of reverse order, obviously Lexicon as Chief Medical Officer, Ameren, where he was Chief Medical Officer and did groundbreaking research that appears in the New England Journal of Medicine, at Merck, where he was a leader of Merck globally in the area of medical information and connections, and at Schering-Plough, where not only was he a scientist, Craig had the dual distinction of wearing a business unit leader hat in the area of oncology and infectious diseases with Schering-Plough. So he has sort of a unique perspective when it comes to artificial intelligence. He's not just looking at it from the development standpoint, of the clinical standpoint. He's looking at it where the rubber meets the road. How will this help us as a business get to patients faster? I also want to welcome Dr. Granowitz to our panel. MaryAnne Rizk is really a game-changing leader of our industry today. I had the privilege of seeing her present numerous times last week during the Gallion Foundation Innovation Week, where she kicked off the important forum where people like Ken Frazier and Dr. Fauci and potentially our upcoming FDA commissioner presented. MaryAnne was chair of the panel with Rob Califf and many other luminaries. She is a thought leader and a driver of business. She has an incredible background. She is the Chief Strategy Officer of Medable. And I was just joking with our other panelists before we kicked off. Medable last week was valued at about $1 billion. Now suddenly it's valued at $2 billion. And I think probably next week they'll be buying up our entire industry. They are right? She's not going to lose. I just want to find out, because MaryAnne might give us tips beyond artificial intelligence that we have to call our brokers about. So stay tuned to her comments, please. But she really has grown up in the industry of research from the grassroots up. By the way, she started her career, as did I, by the way, little does she know, as a pharmacy technician, and moved up into the system. She's worked with mega companies such as Merck, Medidata, Oracle, IQVIA, and obviously she's been a consultant to industry. She's a guide and a counselor to many inside, obviously, Medable, outside Medable. She's appreciated. She's a guide to the Gallion Foundation. She really is one of those, I'll call her the hockey superstar. She skates to where the puck is going when it comes to drug discovery and drug development. Welcome, MaryAnne. It's a pleasure to have you, Kim, Dr. Granowitz, Craig, and MaryAnne Rizk. Dr. Rizk, it's a thrill to have you. We're going to start off our discussion first with an overview presentation by Dr. Kim Branson. He is kind enough to have prepared something for us. He'll go through that. He'll set the tone for our conversation. And afterward, we're going to jump into a panel conversation, first with my inviting Dr. Granowitz and Dr. Rizk to provide comments about Dr. Branson's presentation. We'll leap into a panel. And I also invite our listeners today to send me their questions. We want everyone to participate. Dr. Branson, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Gil. Thanks, everyone. Maybe let's jump to the slide. You don't need to see the introduction here. So I guess since Gil's data's out of date, the AI team at GSK is probably about 120 people now. And we really sort of started building this function at GSK from sort of whole cloth in about 2019 when I joined. And we run as a globally distributed organization. So I'm based in San Francisco, as you know, but we have people in London and Boston and Heidelberg, Philly, and a sort of an increasing team growing out there in Tel Aviv. So as a quick plug, if you're interested in, you have smart friends and colleagues that may be interested in this sort of stuff and are interested in working at GSK, please get in touch. we basically work on a few different things. The reason why we have an AI department at GSK is really to sort of straddle the intersection between two different technologies. So we're fundamentally driven by genetics. So you know this from our interactions with 23andMe and UK Biobank and others, like many other companies. And so that's giving us a huge amount of information. On the other side, we have the other sort of set of technologies coming through with functional genomics. So where we have, the cost of sequencing has gone down. We now have single cell technologies, and we can edit and perturb things at scale, right? Individual genes and regulatory regions. That's produced a huge amount of data. And basically, you need artificial intelligence machine learning to make sense of that. And that was sort of the thrust of our core strategy at GSK is the intersection of all of those three functions to discover new drugs. We also run an AI fellowship for people that have graduated and done machine learning in a different sort of field or interested in learning about pharma and drug discovery. We've just finished the first cohort of 6 of those fellows, and we're starting to hire the next 6. And the people that come in are, the huge people like, have done, neural networks for fitting gauge theory parameters and particle physics and things like that come in. So they change from a different field and come and spend sort of 2 years with us working on really whatever they like across GSK. And we teach them a lot of about drug discovery and development in the process. And then they have the option to sort of stay or wander off into the world. And we do a lot of work actually with custom hardware and things, the types of calculation we do. So particularly with Cerebras systems and NVIDIA. And Cerebras are quite a unique company in that they have, they're one of these generations of companies that are building custom silicon for doing particular types of machine learning. And I'll talk today about some of the work we run on their platform. There's a white paper that will come out soon. Let's jump to the next slide. So I don't really need to tell everybody here, but basically it's due to the explosion of data, right? Like measurement has hit biology where we collect things in so many different modalities, right? And we can use artificial intelligence basically to process that data, to highlight what's important. But in our particular case, also to plan the next experiment, to build a model to extract meaning from that sort of data. And that's really what we're about at GSK. All the systems I'm going to talk about today have a basic experimental feedback loop. So let's jump to the next slide. So we really work on we work across the spectrum of drug discovery, but a large proportion of our group's work is really on target discovery. So, how do we actually use the information that's present in these large genetic databases, plus the, increasing sort of, deep endophenotyping and things like that, the digitization of medical records? How can we integrate all that different data to give us clues about where to design a medicine? We care less about what the medicine is, whether it be an antibody, a small molecule, cell and gene therapy, but more that the target is actually causal for the disease, right? Like a good target would be causal for disease. It would have a low hysteresis with the clinical effects, such like a modulate with a small amount leading to a large change. And so we're really interested in finding those sort of systems. And so really my little meme here is we're looking for the guys that, we want the yellow target, right? The guy who's actually pushing the truck rather than the guy in sort of the flatbed of it doing the work. And so a lot of the group's focus is on that. But we then sort of drift across into sort of more the clinical aspect. And then we have a broader strategy now for every asset we release, be it a medicine or a vaccine, we should have software that sits alongside that asset, which is all about who should get it, how they're likely to benefit, ultimately individual response prediction, but even software within the development process of that. So we're doing a lot of work in computational pathology, for example, which I'll talk about. And we also do a fair bit of fundamental, just pure AI research, particularly into causal machine learning and reconstruction of causal networks from data, automated machine learning, and those sorts of things as well. So sort of next slide. So the key thing for us now is that we basically do experiments with the express purpose of generating data to build a model. So the model itself is a tool that's going to allow us to do drug discovery. And so this is quite unique, is that we actually do what we call experiments as code, right? So for one of the systems that I'll talk about, we build the model, we then ask the model sort of what data it needs. So rather than just, having data we're generating from other processes as a byproduct and saying, well, is this useful for machine learning? Because the problem there is we don't get the examples we want. If we've classified an area really well, we've got 900 examples of it, I don't need another 900 examples. I need the 100 examples or more in the areas where I don't do well. And so what we do is we sort of do an adaptive sampling under uncertainty constraints. We're literally asking the model, what do you need? What are you bad at? What experiments to do? And the experiments we do this in a very scalable, automated fashions aren't actual things that really often make sense to biologists. Like, well, that doesn't seem like a useful experiment. But they are very useful for building the model. And actually, in the course of doing this, we've discovered some really interesting fundamental things about biology. But we try it with the whole thing runs in these learning cycles. We basically build a model, make a whole bunch of predictions, do a whole bunch of experiments as quickly as possible. And that, depending what we're doing, that could be 6 weeks, could be 8 weeks, right? Depending on biology, can only be compressed so much. Generating sort of a set of data and rebuild the model and run that loop again. And that's fundamental to our core process. And it's probably pretty unique at GSK compared to other companies. Jump to the next slide. So I'll give you 2 examples of the types of things we work on. So really, the first one is really what we call variant to gene mapping, and it's also related to sort of gene to function. But in all these large genetic databases where we have people with the disease and people who look just like them that don't have the disease, and we ask the question like, what's different in their genetics? Does that give us a clue as to what to look at? Of all those variants, most of them, maybe about 15-20%, we know what to do with, and they land in an open reading frame or right next to a promoter of a protein. We know that it affects the function of that protein, and you can go and interrogate that. The bulk of them, however, right, fall within these sort of regulatory regions of the DNA. And because of the three-dimensional structure of DNA and how things are packed in chromatin and the like, it's not always obvious that it's the nearest gene, right? It could be something within what we call a TAD, a topological associated domain, or it could be further distant. So it's really key for us. If we could start to understand what's happening with that 85% of the data, we would have more targets to look at. So the first thing is, like, can we map variants to genes? Now, there's a simple rule. I'll just pick the closest gene, and yeah, that will get you there, maybe 40% of the time, but there still leaves a lot of data on the table. So that's something that we work on. So we create an AI system to solve that. So we just jump to the next slide. So what this system does is it takes sort of a complex genetic loci. So the panel on the left there has, you can see maybe blurry, it's like the blur on my screen, those red dots. Those are some really high confidence hits, right? Very like, highly significant hits, but it's not very clear which gene they actually map to. They sort of fall in this sort of region. So we actually treat the whole thing actually as a ranking problem. I spent a lot of time previously doing fun things in search and things like that. And so what we should do is we're saying for the variant in this particular phenotype, what is the gene, right, given its position? And so we actually turn this into a ranked list. Those lines are actually the confidence bounds. The top ranked one in this lovely cherry-picked example is obviously that small dot there, where the bounds are so tight that there's a single dot. But the experiment then is actually to then go and edit that particular variant in a cell type of interest, right, for that disease, and look at the change in gene expression of those related genes, right? So if I put the variant in and I see this huge change in the expression of the mRNA for that particular gene, I go, that variant affects that particular gene. And that's what we see here. Now, this is a lovely example. It's, I think, very clearly just one example. Many of these things, they can affect one major gene and slightly affect the other ones. And there's also dependence on when you measure these things. There's a time series dependence. So if I perturb and then measure very quickly, I might see a different effect than if I perturb and measure in 12, 24, 48 hours time. And that's that functional genomics feedback loop. And that's the data we use to build this model. So we just jump to the next slide. So inside this system is actually a large number of different AI systems for different modalities. So there are a whole bunch of models that learn off raw DNA sequence directly to predict open, closed chromatin. There are various transcription factor science, various types of transcription factor science. There are models that tell you how different this cell type is to another cell type, so I understand cell similarity. There's some great hand-engineered features from human geneticists as well. There's a large knowledge graph that sort of goes on and causal things. All these things then get fed together into another model that learns how to combine these for the particular domain. And that sort of gives us sort of this rank list of genes. So it's really quite a large, complex entity. We work much like a software engineering shop for my sort of like background in startups and things like that. So we build and ship these things in a regular cadence. So we jump to the next slide. One other thing that's of interest is that, we want to be sample efficient, right? We know a lot about biology and medicine. We've been doing this for a while. So what we actually do, we do a lot of, we have this very large knowledge graph. So we have, full text mining to Elsevier and PubMed and Archive and all the kind of common data. And one of the other great advances in AI methodologies has certainly been in NLP. So we do a lot of work on what we call sort of entity extraction. So we create what's called a semantic triple. And all that is a thing, a relation, and another thing, or a subject, predication, object, right? In this case, I'm pulling out that PARP as a protein. It has a role in DNA repair and transcription regulation, right? PARP is one of the targets of our drug Zejula, for example. So we're able to pull these sort of things out, and we also recognize genes, diseases, small molecules, you name it, right? Because there's this massive database of about 500 billion triples, right? And from that, we can extract various sort of subgraphs, and we represent these things in what's called node embedding. So the algorithm actually knows a lot about what we might hypothesize about things, or what's really well known. So there's a temporal dimension to these databases and things like that. And that gives us this large knowledge graph. That's clearly useful for machine learning models, but it's clearly useful for all sorts of other things within GSK as well. So we'll jump to the next slide. And so really what we come to now is that we're very much of the opinion that data is actually the critical factor for success now, right? We all, as companies, have access. We're all fishing in the same ponds. We all have UK Biobank, FinGen, things like that, right? But what's going to be different is our ability to actually, get there faster and understand and mine that data more effectively than our competitors. And the way we do that is by generating data and realizing what data is important and generating that kind of data at scale. And that sort of allows us to really understand the value of these other public and private sources, right? What's unique about them? Like, do we have that as a sort of a high entropy or low entropy source from our perspective? And so that's sort of the world we're in right now. And I think that we're seeing a lot more companies appearing that are generating data now at scale as well. It's becoming a defensible moat. So we'll jump to the next slide. So one of the things we also do, we do obviously a lot of machine learning on clinical images. I didn't realize I had this slide in. For example, looking at, let's say, the liver, for example, looking at, abdominal fat, things like that, and using that to segment things for case control studies in genetics, to do GWAS sort of stuff rather than using traditional medical records, or perhaps looking at cognitive decline and trying to build markers of those sorts of things. So obviously, clinical imaging is a large area, but we have a large research group that does that. We just jump forward. So begin the next slide. So really, one of the most major areas is in multimodal combination, right? So we have all these different types of data from our patients, particularly in oncology. I might have, the tumor biopsy. I might have ctDNA clonal stuff over time. I have imaging I do every 7 weeks or 8 weeks, for example. I'm doing labs weekly. I might have a microbiome sample, a pathology. All these sorts of information contain information about the response, but each one of the cells isn't usually predictive enough. The days of a single biomarker which indicates response, which is blood measures, that's gone. They've ever really existed in the first place. So we do a lot of work on how to build these sorts of things and how to actually learn this. Now, we don't sort of end-to-end learn the whole things. We build models for each bits and work out how to combine them. But I will go into some detail on one, I think, which is the greatest growth areas right now, which is computational pathology. So we just jump to the next slide. So what's actually happened recently is really this incredible digitization of pathology, right? So no longer are hospitals having a room full of glass slides kicking around and tissue blocks, but people start to scan these sort of things with, these FDA-approved slide scanners. And you get these massive, 4 terabyte images to apply with. You have a huge body of existing research and things like that with, ResNet and UNets and things like that from existing computer vision. And it's very natural to take that and apply that to pathology tasks. We know there's lots of information present in pathology images, right? So simple, scoring and grading has been done for a long time, and that correlates with prognosis. But what else can we do with this, right? So if you should have jumped to the next slide. So one of the things we can ask is what seems like a crazy question, like, well, can I determine the genetic status of a tumor from an image, right? Like a human can't do this, but could I do this, for example, right? Maybe there are microgrowth patterns and changes that's going on. And so one of the things we're interested, obviously, is, HRD, so homologous repair deficiency, which basically tells you whether it is a complex phenotype, whether a tumor has lost the ability to repair DNA, right? And that's can be a good target for a PARP inhibitor. So you ask a human pathologist to look at this, and else you'll say, I cannot do this, right? It's not a task a human can do. So jump to the next slide. And you might say, well, should we really be bounded by human ability? Because if I can show you 2 things here, I don't know if it really works, but if I give you the right background, you can't even tell if the 2 lines are parallel on a horizontal or vertical frame, right? So, but I can put a machine learning model that can do that all day, every day, right? So we can try and do very different things here. So we just jump to the next slide. And this is really interesting. So we have built systems and we do a lot of work on this now. It's complex. You have to work out whether tissue's folded over or it's stained. You have enough tumor and stroma boundary and things like that. So there's a lot of other things you have to build to do this. But you can take methods, and we don't use convolutional neural networks, but they do apply in this domain. And you can actually build a model that has a reasonable PPV, right? Let's go to 70%. So 70% of the time that you have an HRD, and this is a class imbalance problem, it's actually right to actually predict this sort of status from tumor. So there is information present there, right? And you can do further things on different types of genes. And we're not the only people to do this. There's lots of examples in the literature now. But this actually has profound implications. Old H&E staining has been in this for a long time. But you can actually use this for triage and things like that, right? Or, you've already diagnosed and you have a tumor. You can run this as a course of the natural histology workflow and then decide, are you going to spend the extra time and money to do sequencing and things to confirm that or whatever. It expands access. It has great utility. And the great thing with these sorts of models is they are a digital model. They're very cheap to do. You've already got the data. You just send the data to the cloud and you can get your result back, for example. So this is, for us, a really key area. And we're also seeing now with the growth of spatial transcriptomics, where we have an array over the slide, where we're measuring mRNA expression and things like that, or spatial proteomics and things like that. There's a huge amount of work coming in that. And even now, the new generation of lattice light microscopes that are imaging whole tissue blocks, we're actually getting the whole full three-dimensional structure of the tumor, rather than just a few different sort of slides you pulled out in biopsy and trying to recreate what the spatial structure of the tumor is. So this is a really interesting area of work, which we'll be doing a lot more, and we'll be talking more about this. So I think I'll just jump to the final slide, which should be at least some acknowledgements from the various people. So just calling out where, we are sort of everywhere, including we have one team member who runs lots of stuff, who lives in the wilds of Montana there. That's not actually his cabin, but I'm told it looks pretty much like it. But yeah, at that point, I'll pause and let Gil take over.
First of all, thank you for this just amazing overview. I have a lot of questions as a result of your presentation, but I'm going to save that for the panel conversation, because I also want to invite Craig and MaryAnne to jump in, not jump on top of you, but jump in to the conversation. Everything from your structure, your focus, to actually where you're concentrating talent and why. All fascinating, wonderful presentation. And I'm sure that Melbourne misses you terribly, but San Francisco is just thrilled that you're there, as is the world. So thank you for that. I'm going to just invite Craig Granowitz for a few moments to offer some thoughts, and then MaryAnne also has prepared some thoughts to share with our audience today. I just want to ask you, Kim, I don't want to put you on the spot. If it's no, it's no. MaryAnne, the same, because you have slides. Would you be comfortable sharing your slides with our attendees today if they ask?
Yeah, that's fine.
And MaryAnne, you're okay with that as well?
Yes, likewise. By
Yes,
the way, Kim, I have to say that presentation, it's amazing what could be done with the precision and the analytics and some of the predictability through the data. Congratulations on the progress you're making, because it's quite frankly the motivation on what we do, or as we're collecting data, how that's being aggregated and prepared for intelligence and insights. So phenomenal presentation. Thank you for sharing.
Yes, I'm seeing on the chat area also, like you're all receiving virtual hugs, which is unusual. Like, it's rare when the audience sort of is sending you kisses and hugs. They're going crazy, by the way. You guys are just off the chart. By the way, this panel is by far the best panel already. We've just started off. Craig, I mean, you've been in the trenches of having to apply this. Kim organizes the whole structure, and you've been the person I know from experience in the hot seat of designing trials, looking at trials that may or may not work. Could you reflect on Kim's presentation and the fact that you're a chief medical officer having to make the decisions of trial design, of go, no go, what information you have, what information you don't have? Just give us an insight, a top line insight.
Yeah, thank you, Gil. And Kim, really enjoyed that presentation. And again, the Australian accent also makes you sound a whole lot smarter than Jersey accent. But that is my deficit to live with. And but I think that, Kim, your presentation and my perspective are exactly as Gil teed up at the beginning, the dynamic and the tension between artificial and intelligence, and what I would call what has been created a false choice between technology and insight. And I, as a physician, first and foremost, believe really as a holistic person. I view the world holistically as opposed to a reductionist. And having both the benefit of a PhD, and you're coming from the perspective of being a reductionist, coming down to the precise point of where there is a perturbation, and I looking at it from a organizational or organismal perspective, is the synergy and the value of the technology is the human being behind it. And to me, I had really three key takeaways, and I think you hit on them really well. The first is that these are extraordinarily powerful tools for hypothesis generation. But to capture the real value requires iteration, which requires a human insight and decision making to make it really work. So I think you have this extraordinarily powerful set of tools, but without the human intellect to engage it, to empower it, to make it come alive, it is just a set of tools. It is the steam engine that cannot be harnessed without the person to direct it and work with it, learn from it, and create the most value. So message number one to me, if the panel and the attendees remember anything that I have to say, is first and foremost, it is a phenomenally powerful way of generating hypotheses. The second is that the human being ultimately has to be the expert. You need to understand and harness the tool. And it really is the insight and the combination of factors, all of the wet science people, all the biologists that are working with the artificial intelligence and the engineers coming together to create the most value. And the third, which again is really a derivative of the second, is the human being, and particularly the team, is what I would call the special sauce. Because without that level of collaboration, diversity and inclusion of opinion, with the power of the tool and understanding how to use it, we don't really achieve our ultimate goals. So I think, to me, again, the three key points are, this is phenomenal for hypothesis generation. Ultimately, the human being and the team have to be involved in iterative recalibration of the tool. And at the end of the day, the team and the human beings are the special sauce that ultimately have to make it all work together and be a tasty meal. So I think, those to me are probably the really critical takeaways. And I look forward to the panel. And to Gil's point, I've used at some point over the last 15 years, whether it's as a sales leader, marketing leader, commercial lead, entrepreneur, VC, biotech startup, ramp up, build out, medical, clinical, commercial, R&D. I've used a lot of these tools, and I'm happy to talk to any of those examples during the panel.
Yeah, thank you, Craig, for that. And actually, our Merck times in a way overlap. I'm actually going to probably ask all of you, but you particularly, a little bit about the evolution from big data to artificial intelligence. When I started, and Merck was, when you were at Merck, and Merck was buying up the Maccabi data in Israel, making a big announcement about that, the whole genre, the jargon was big data. Obviously, from Kim's presentation and what he's been doing, how you sought to reconcile in your comments, it's not just about volumes or an overabundance of data. It's the now what intellectual direction that you point to, that Kim is really responsible for figuring out, almost like the puzzle master. And ultimately, it's the human intellect that is figuring out how to best apply the artificial intelligence. And it's not this or that, but we'll find out a little more. MaryAnne, as I mentioned earlier, has this superpower, and her superpower is not figuring out where we are right now. It's kind of structuring innovation, drug discovery, drug development, to go where the sort of like sail to where the puck is going. So MaryAnne also has some slides to share with us, and MaryAnne, thank you for that.
Thank you. Okay, so allow me to share my screen. And so first off, just the comments have been excellent in terms of recognizing we have an opportunity to leverage data and answer questions that we may have not answered before in clinical research. And one of the things I think about at Medable and what we do and how we offer that value is the ability to, we've been invited by patients to not only engage in clinical trials on a digital trial, but now we've got data that we're collecting before, during, and after the study. So as Dr. Kim was mentioning, the fact that we're looking at these disease progressions, where we're looking at the data, we're actually trying to analyze. I think this just creates a tremendous opportunity to talk about what kind of intelligence we want all across the life cycle of the patient's journey, whether they already consented in the trial, they're in the trial, and also post-trial, right? To think about that healthcare impact. And so allow me to share my screen, and I will use a slide that I've put together on really some of those areas. So one of the things that we're looking at is, Medable as a decentralized platform, looking to understand how we're able to leverage technology for the convenience of clinical trials, where patients are literally leveraging access in the power of their hands through a mobile device, an application, and we're looking at how we're creating research for every biology and every body. And so we're looking with the volume of data that's being collected, how we actually can drive more precision-based medicine because of the proliferation of data. So when we think about AI and ML, we think about all the different technologies being used to aggregate information about the patient's health, how they want to be consented, if they actually understand what the enrollment process is and how to be engaged, providing access and convenience, and leveraging the proliferation of data, as Kim had mentioned, has soared, right? We're looking at connected sensors, all to improve the clinical trial health outcome, improving the patient experience, and also the way we're engaging with sites. And so when I think about the number of applications we have in clinical research collecting data, and today we were hearing about how we're actually integrating that data to improve the insights. I've had this little architectural platform here, just recognizing that we have many different stakeholders, right? Within the drug discovery process, as we're trying to establish the efficacy and safety, as we're progressing a patient along the journey of a clinical trial process, there's a lot of trust and transparency required as we're looking at aggregating information about the patient so we can make more intelligent decision making. The term of being is actually something we embrace in this industry, right? Being able to have the insight to determine how we pivot and change. Being someone that's come from a various data organizations, I can't tell you how incredibly important it is to not only have access to that information in real time, but have a seamless interoperability, whether we're looking at leveraging EHR medical record data from a patient and actually integrate it into the clinical setting. And so now is a time in our industry where we're actually performing that type of integration, leveraging information from labs and wearables, and also help us become much more intelligent in our patient recruitment, much more intuitive for the patient, and create that ease. And so when we think about the journey and we think about what we're doing for the use of creating clinical as a care option, we have this ability to leverage some of these applications for patients. And as we're collecting that data, like the presentation I just heard from Kim with GSK, is how are we now establishing that insight for the patient? How can we predict aspects of determining signal detection of risk, how we're able to determine improving the end experience. We were very privileged to hear about a number of use cases and some recent panel discussions on how, when leveraging these technologies in an ability for improving health outcomes for patients, we're seeing some of the results where there is intelligence built in on the predictive safety, being able to further engage, help ensure that we're not that we're doing things to retain the patient and avoid those dropouts, right? So if you think about some of the critical aspects of a clinical trial, is really being able to retain and recruit the right patients. And so we're just really pleased that we're making progress as an industry. So this is like, we are collecting constantly the data. We're making it so much easier for patients, right? Constantly monitoring, giving them ratings, giving them reminders, ensuring they've got something very useful. All that is information being collected. All that is information that could be leveraged to understand how we create more purpose-built use cases. And so what I will share with you is one slide around how we're actually creating that longitudinal data and de-identifying information from EHR data and how that could be used with real-world evidence. So now there couldn't have been a better time, right, on how we're tokenizing that information around our patients, how we've created that intersection and synergies between observational studies, determining EMR and genetic data, establishing aspects of how that now can be repurposed not only for clinical data, but how does that actually change the healthcare segment of claims, registry, and pharmacy. And so we're really seeing some excellent collaborations happening in the field to bridge that real world data, trial data, and clinical data together. And so with that, I'll just kind of end the presentation recognizing that this is the direction that it's being head in being able to establish true insights as well as further improving how we're engaging with patients out in the field and improving intelligence in how we're running clinical trials. And actually, Gil, I will say, as my colleagues will share, we talk about clinical trials, right? It's really going to be moving towards a clinical science because we've had such improvements on the way we've been able to structure those algorithms and establish insights and make recommendations. So we're really embarking on a true new trajectory of intelligence in clinical research, and that's just very exciting. And you'll see the proliferation of also the talent, right? The digital engineers, the digital architects, the digital analysts of the future, recognizing that this is a talent that's really needed to maximize how we're making those decisions. And I would say it's not man versus machine, it's man plus machine, right? There are areas that are going to just further create much more level of accuracy, reducing errors, also reduce redundancies of tasks, all while creating the importance of safety and efficacy for patients. So we couldn't have picked a better time to be all scientists and engineers to make an impact in healthcare and humanity.
Thank you, MaryAnne. Thank you so much for that. And we're going to now enter into a panel conversation. So I invite our panelists to come back to the main stage, and our technical team will make that possible. You'll close out of the deck, and I think that Zane, who's leading up our technical aspects, will bring us all back into full screen. A lot of food for thought here. I just want to say that this is such a complex area, because often in the area where I sit in, which is also the application of medical science to improve people's lives, I sit in countless big rooms with no windows and big tables to talk about why we're not going to use artificial intelligence. It disrupts the system. We have a lot of investment in the system, and obviously the three of you are leading the change. So before we kick into this conversation, I just want to remind our audience there are two tabs on your screen. One is a chat tab. It's you'll see the number 7 probably on your screen. That's where people are just chatting back and forth. And then to the right of that, there's a Q&A tab. If you hit the Q&A tab, you can actually ask questions. But I am trying to monitor both the chat area and the Q&A area so that I can represent your questions and bring them into the conversation. I'm actually getting a thumbs up from someone on that. That's very kind of them. Everybody loves affirmation. Lots of thumbs up. Everybody enjoys affirmation in life, and certainly our panelists deserve it, because they're world-class experts who are carved out significant amount of their time to share their wisdom. Again, before we kick into the first question, I want to again extend my thanks to the CEWIT staff who've put this conference together, Gina and her team and others, and Levi Shapiro, who was one of the organizers of the CEWIT conference, and Dr. Shmuel Aniv, who's really the founder of the conference and the conference chair. My thanks to all those people who make this possible. So I'm going to kick this off, and Kim, you really have been responsible for pulling together 100 people, more than 100 people around the world, to establish a system for Glaxo. And beyond getting into the operation, I have a question for you, because you started really as one of the original thinkers behind GSK's artificial intelligence infrastructure. Would you mind sharing with us some of the hiccups and bumps that were along the way of even moving from the 50 people you had when your bio appeared on the GSK page that I so diligently studied in order to make my introduction, and then within I'm certain it's not overnight or a week, but within that time period, to expand, to double your size of talent. Could you share a little bit about what you were thinking about in terms of bringing more people aboard, what they were going to do, how they were going to augment the 50 that you already had on your team, and what did you sort of see as your key success factors in terms of serving Glaxo so that Glaxo can serve humanity? Big question for a big thinker who goes to cafes in the Bay Area where people from Twitter and Apple turn to you for advice.
Sure. Yeah, I guess we did create an AI organization of we rounded up we rounded up some of the sort of analytics people, and some of those people were people that would love to argue the intricacies of neural networks all day, and some of them are more data scientists. So we did sort of found out in that sort of group, and that's what we started with. A lot of my career has been, as probably some of you know, building startups, and so I have a network of people who I can call up and say, "Hey, I'm doing this. Come over. It won't suck," right? And some of them answer the call. And the other thing is that to be honest, GSK, I was sort of thinking of my next move, and it might have been to do another company, and it was only from people saying like, "No, GSK isn't what you expect, Kim. They're changing. They're different," and realizing that you've got huge, tremendous support from Hal Barron and people like that, and you realize that the company is really they're really serious about this. I'm like, because I need a whole bunch of data engineers. The AI people want data engineers. I need to be able to move fast. I want HR. I gotta talk to people and give an offer in a week. You can't spend the usual pharma period of time with talking to people because these people have other jobs. And to be honest, big pharma is not the first place you think of. Oh, that's a cool place. That's where I'll go, right? It's usually Facebook, Google, and the usual suspects.
You got it.
Plus other startups, right? We got more upside. They're like, why would I join this big thing? What we did was sort of come in and say, guess what? We're going to do it very differently. And that was the criteria. We're going to have Slack. We're going to work very differently. We're going to very, very fast. You're going to carve out a bubble around us. You're going to leave us alone, right? We'll use Max. We're going to use this like all your systems. They don't apply. This is how it works if you want us to come. And the company said, okay, we're on board with that. Go. Right. And we said, okay, by the way, we're not going to be in one location. We're going to hire people wherever they are. And all they need is a laptop and things like that. Critical masses are great, but we're not going to make people move. Right. One of the great things about a multinational is they have offices everywhere in the country. So we'll just exploit that fact. And it turns out that that's a really great thing. And so we also, at a time when we're generating data, the company is actually, generating prospective data on a rolling basis, right? Rather than here's a data set, that's pretty unique. That's kind of catnip. It's a really big, impactful problem. And, just from talking to friends that, some of them are academics, some of them are getting frustrated. I'm like, look, I'm unconstrained by compute. I have data and we can translate things to impact. This is a really interesting problem. Some of my friends are now, getting older and looking themselves in the mirror and thinking maybe writing recommender systems aren't possibly the be all end all of life, right? And others. And so once we sort of start to build a critical mass and we're doing really interesting things, we also publish our code, we publish stuff at Europe's, we're running these various programs, right? We have custom silicon that other people don't have with Cerebus. It becomes a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. More and more people want to come, right? And you get a network effect. And that's what you have to build. So I was fortunate enough that I have a bunch of people that are, that I can call on that will come, and that sort of see its initial thing. But now we're sort of starting to really hire and grow, right? And that's created things, and it's pushed, honestly, on the rest of the organization of a very different way of working and doing things, right? You tell biologists, oh, by the way, we're going to work in 2-week sprints. They're like, oh, biology doesn't work that way. Everything works that way. Everything is a garden of forking paths, right? We don't do yearly goals. What, a yearly goal? That's crazy. Let's do quarterly goals, not OKRs, right? We'll have a 1-year plan and we'll review it in 3 months' time. And it's that pace, right? A pace and scale and energy, but it's kind of fun. You've got the rest of the organization, they want to innovate. They want to try new things. You just have to give them permission, honestly, to do it, right? And so that's been a lot of fun to grow and do that aspect. So that's how we started doing things. And a lot of it was really, we knew directionally, we've got functional genomics, we've got genetics. But, some of those things take a long time to shuffle through the pipeline. But there is tremendous opportunity in the clinical trial space, right? Now, we are, as Craig said, it is small data, but you've got what MaryAnne's doing is it's small data for one trial, but I can collect all this other data about a patient, which we traditionally haven't done, and we can make stackable data, right? I can have lots and lots of trials together. So maybe my individual drug for RA failed, terrible, bad for patients, but I've learned a lot about RA, and I can learn across all the trials you've ever done, right? And you suddenly realize that's one of the things GSK has. You basically have this massive biobank of data, right, to mine and use, and how to bring that back in. So there's much more of a connection now from development back into discovery and research. And now we can collect so more things cheaply, right, with sensors and wearables and things like that that there's a great loop to run as well. And that's also the other thing that's sort of driving the larger strategy. So those the questions around that. So it was like let's start to apply things. Let's actually reduce variance. Like, should we really do all this precision genomic medicine and machine learning to come up with a target and drug, and then our clinical endpoint's going to be two guys in a room going 70%, another guy 75%, like that's it, right? Like that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, Craig is smiling at that. He's been one of the right? That's great. I'm a very big believer that culture drives performance. And I'm going to ask MaryAnne a question, then I'm going to ask Craig to provide an overview comment, because Craig has been one of the people in the room who has to make the go, no-go decision clinically. He has been one of the people who's looked at the trial design and just says, this isn't going to work. And so I'm going to ask Craig to, as he does, intensely listen to you and MaryAnne. And then I'm actually going to meet sort of where the rubber meets the road. That's the question, Craig. Be ready. I'm going to be asking you the rubber meets the road question, because that's the job that you have again and again. MaryAnne, Medable has done kind of what Kim is talking about, where Kim talks about, look, I've been in the area, I've been in the Bay Area, I knew these people, I did startups, I knew talent. They wanted Macs. They didn't know what an Intel-based computer was. They've never seen one before. They walk around with their own stuff. They make their own computers. He's doing his thing. Now along comes Medable, and you grew up in these mammoth organizations like Oracle, Acuvia. You play with PowerXL. You know the CRO industry from its earlier iterations, and now today Medable comes along and puts this layer in. It's a collaborative platform. It ties in all those people. It ties in the Glaxos and the Lexicons and everybody else. But I noticed that you've been hiring people from Kim's crew, right? The Apple folks have come into Medable suddenly. Tesla, Nike, and you're saying to yourself, well, certainly Nike knows a lot about artificial intelligence. They do. Not science, but look, they're mining data about what sneaker you want and what age group wants that sneaker. They're using massive amounts of data to figure out what they're going to launch into the marketplace to remain a multi-billion-dollar organization. Can you share with us a little bit about what was the thinking process not to be the traditional route of a CRO saying, oh, we're going to get artificial intelligence too, right? We're a big organization. We have tens of thousands of employees. We manage X number of sites. We're going to look at information. And then later on, I just want you to think about it. I have a question that was asked from the audience about everybody, about wearables, digital devices, collecting information, artificial intelligence. Don't answer that now. I just want the three of you thinking about that. MaryAnne, you're collecting eclectic people. You're doing what Kim is doing in Medable. Why is that important?
So it's an extraordinary question, and so I give all that credit to our CEO and founder, Michelle Longmire, who the vision for Medable as a SaaS and platform company is to recognize where the trend is happening in clinical research and healthcare. And so when we're thinking about reimagining the experience in clinical development, we're recognizing that there's this inherent opportunity to modernize medicine. And how do we modernize medicine? It's being able to create a digital experience, it's leveraging data, and it's also looking to decentralize the way we've been working. I call it the 3D, right? And so when we think about the talent that's needed, if the objective is to improve more intelligent-based research, to really maximize that clinical science element, and recognizing there's a consumer opportunity where a patient can walk into not only have the ability to learn about a clinical trial or access it on mobile devices, but perhaps in addition of that flexibility, whether they want to see their physician remotely, in person, or even locally, whether it's at a local pharmacy, right? So in terms of the talent, right, it's understanding, less than 5% of patients globally are enrolled in a clinical study, right? And we also recognize there is that lack of awareness, understanding, and possibly trust. So it's identifying how do we position clinical research as a care? What are some of the human-centered design techniques needed to really ensure there's an incredible intuitive user experience? In the slides that I presented earlier, you saw some of those images of just data moving, right? It's being able to recognize how patients want to be consented, how they want in terms of a behavior. What are some of the things that are needed in order for them to look? They opened up they opened up their door to us, and now clinical research are in the homes of thousands of patients around the world, right? We couldn't be more excited about this opportunity. We think about the leadership and the talent. It's around how do we ensure it's a world-class white glove experience, right? Maybe even like less than 5 years ago, I think we were talking about clinical research participants as subjects, right? It was like this terminology that, we didn't really think about the patient as a customer, right? Or the user, right? And
That's
so,
a question, by the way, people are asking. So we're going to get to that. Totally.
yeah, and so hopefully I've addressed your question where we really recognize that there's this inherent opportunity, this paradigm shift from site-centric to patient-centric, and how do we really modernize that experience? And look, last thing I'll say, when the pandemic hit, the mainstream topic was clinical research. People that never even appreciated what happens to get a drug discovered, that usually takes 18 years and $1 billion, is now something that we're doing at a rapid rate because of the intelligence and collaborations and different thought and talent needed to improve that user experience, data quality, efficacy, safety, and overall approval to get drug to market. So
yeah, it's
really the reasons behind it.
The potential of artificial intelligence and humanity, to Craig's point.
If I can add one more comment, and then
you can add one more comment.
One more comment. We recognize that the next generation of talent is changing, right? So I want to compliment what Kim was mentioning about, startup and thinking and recruiting.
But don't steal his people, please. Kim
No,
sent me a
well,
text.
we'll
He
collaborate,
said,
right?
MaryAnne is making me nervous, he wrote. He said, no, they have an edgy idea. I thought I was the edgy one in AI.
No, we're all about
keep her far away from my people. Kim, you see, I put it on record, okay?
I think what is interesting, and Kim, I welcome you to comment on this. I think the conversation has changed, right? The discussions have changed where, quite frankly, technology and data have a seat at the table in clinical and commercial. It's incredibly important. And I will say that next generation of talent, where we're, at Medable, we just launched a digital certification program recognizing that next generation of talent that's needed to actually do what we're saying, to actually accomplish what the aspirations are. And so, really pleased that, at least we're trying to contribute and have consumers of that, whether they're CROs, sponsors, sites, patients, really learning about some of that information. But, just something to think about where, my kids will probably be, leading informatics and data aspects, and it's going to be inherent in every field and every industry, but more so in healthcare and life sciences. So it's an incredible time, and recognizing that's the talent we need.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to shift over to Dr. Granowitz. Craig, Craig, you're in a situation again and again, a C-suite role of having to make decisions, trial design, compound, go forward, not go forward. Do we have the right sites? Do we have the right investigators? You're not only guiding a company forward in terms of the value of its pipeline potential, you're trying to address humanity's most urgent needs. You're the buyer of essentially assistance to propel your efforts forward. You've heard from Kim, you've heard from MaryAnne. What's going through your mind right now as a person from the industry who has to deploy the tools?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to comment. And again, I'm really revitalized from the comments from my esteemed panelists that are experts really in areas that I am not. I think there are really three critical issues, two of which AI can play a critical role. The third, far less so. So the first is to create the hypothesis that becomes your primary and secondary endpoint of your clinical research. And I think to create a variety of trial design options. Because remember, in a randomized clinical trial, you get the chance to ask one question. That one question might cost you $300 million in 10 years to do, but you answer one question from a regulatory standpoint. So it better be the right question with the right guideposts around it. Because if you don't hit your primary endpoint, your money, in a sense, is wasted. Because it becomes then hypothesis generation for the next trial. And at least in a startup, there is no next trial. You're done. You're cooked. So I think AI can help create a universe of questions and then narrow those questions. I think on the back end, to the points particularly MaryAnne was making, is that AI can help in a lot of the ongoing frictions in the data generation and collection. If you think about a typical FDA trial with a pivotal outcome study, you're talking about 5 million data points. You're talking about 500 sites, 12 countries over 5 years. And that all needs to be quality assured. And how do you do that quickly and efficiently and effectively to ensure quality control and to speed the submission process? The middle part, to me, is it's all about the human touch. The major issue of the clinical study is how do I get and keep patients on treatment? And that is purely emotional. It is not intellectual. And in my experience, people get on trials for 3 reasons. I love myself, I love my family or humanity, and I love my doctor. But all 3 of those are driven by love. They're driven by commitment, and they're driven by personal connectivity, either for self-interest, altruism, or commitment to someone, their healthcare provider, who's very important in their lives. So again, it comes back to don't be John Henry and fight the steam engine. Be the guy who's going to turn on and off the steam engine. And I think, to me, when I look at clinical research, I use big data to help me define the hypothesis, refine the hypothesis. It's ultimately my judgment of what's going to be the primary endpoint, what's going to be the key secondary, and what I'm not going to try to study because I don't have the statistical power to do it. How am I going to pick the right sites and keep the patients on? Almost all human and all interpersonal. And at the back end, big data, again, plays an absolutely pivotal and underutilized role in ongoing quality assurance, remote site visits, reducing cost, reducing friction, cycle time, and more rapid and high quality submissions. So that's sort of how I would view it, is in the C-suite, Gil, and how I try to use these tools. But at the end of the day, what I get judged on, did I pick the right disease? Did I pick the right endpoint? And did I get in a quality file that ultimately a payer is going to pay for? That's what I get judged on.
Craig, listening to your comment, listening to the 3 of you, because you're listening to each other intensely, you're responding to each other. The sort of the go around we just had is a pullout from this panel conversation and should be heard probably by everybody in our industry in terms of the best practices of how to really engage or organize around artificial intelligence, how to look at it creatively, and ultimately, as you've just stated, an individual has to make a decision. That's where the rubber meets the road. I want to go deeper into some of the questions that we're asking. I want to thank the audience. We have a very active group of participants out there. They're asking a number of questions, and Kim, I want to. I'm going to try to answer all the questions or have the questions asked. I'm not going to raise them in order because sometimes a question just really touches the moment. Kim, a question directed to you. I'd like everybody thinking about it. It's something I've written about in the past, which is when the big disruptors come in, if they come in, the Amazons, the Microsofts, the Apples, are we sort of like whetting the appetites of the mega players to come in and be the ultimate transformational agents? By the way, for the record, I don't like the word disruption. I think we're in evolution constantly and transformation. But Kim, you kind of rub shoulders with the Apples of the world. When do we think they're going to come in and just say, wait a minute, this is a $1 trillion industry, and we're the ultimate data companies. Why are we sitting on the periphery? Google and Verily, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, even, by the way, Walmart. Why don't we wander into the pond ourselves? What do you think?
Yeah, I think you sort of have to think where they're targeting, if it's the development or consumer or things like that. But I mean, one of the reasons why Amazons and that have been successful is they can get lots of data at scale cheaply, right? But what's one of the advantages of being a pharmaceutical company, right, is that you have the right to do experiments, right, to run trials with humans, right? And that's a very unique thing. We generate very particular data. It has a whole regulatory expertise. You have to have the supply chains, pharma supply, all those things have to happen, right? And it's not a lot of data you get back, to Craig's point. And all the tools we're building, they're all narrow purpose AI for specific verticals and things like that. Now, they have lots of data on consumer products and things like that, and all the different aspects around people, individual consumers. And certainly Amazon, for example, has great logistics hardware, can deliver. You're seeing them enter into doing generics for generics and pharmaceuticals and things like that. Apple, I think, and others, you can see them, we were wearing one of these, right? We now have continuous pulse measurement, right? For the first time on the largest section of humans, right? Over the course, we've never even had this before. We don't even know what this means. Is there a trend relationship with human health, heart rate increasing and decreasing? We know vaguely there's something there. We are generating data at scale in a different way, right? In this this outpatient setting, right? Which I think they will start to be involved in diagnostics and nudges and things like that. Certainly sort of like the strategy we're seeing emerge from Apple. There's lots of things they try. My friends who work there don't tell me anything, because they're not allowed to, right? But I think that, you'll see the different companies, Verily, for example, Verily is doing very interesting things, right? You're going to see, I think, they're obviously doing drug development. They've got their baseline study, just knowing like what is the base phenotypic variation of humans? How do people evolve and change, right? That's some of the areas that we'll see them playing in. I think in the consumer market and things like that, right? OTC, those sorts of areas, we'll see a lot more types of things in more health and wellness. And I think, we'll also see really like it's a very odd industry where we make a product, we don't sell it directly, we give it to someone else who decides whether to use it or not, and we never actually ever talk to the consumer except that a professional body says, oh, your stuff works or not, and here's how it works. How does the pharmaceutical company actually get more involved in the particular patient, saying, oh, by the way, we don't have a lot of people on your sort of trials. Can we ask you a few questions? Did this work for you or not, right? How do we actually build those loops back, right? To understand and say, okay, it didn't work for you. By the way, we're running a new trial. Do you want to be recruited, right? Get MaryAnne involved to do that. So there's an interesting loop where you're seeing, I think, the big companies will start to be much more consumer focused, and that's not a bad thing, right? That's only going to lead to better things, but it's all about the data about the patients, and that's what they're very good at. And like all that extra data, which we typically haven't done, right? That's because of the cost of collection. You don't want to burden the patient, but we typically don't know much about the patient's vocations and avocations, right? To Craig's point, who are they, right? How do they get to this condition? What's important to them, right? Like all those factors. We don't know anything about that, but certainly there are other companies that have better understanding of that sort of data. So there may be opportunities actually in that space as well.
So let me ask you this, Kim: Apple Watch 7 or 6? What's on your wrist?
I think this is a 7. I'm not really sure.
Yeah. Of course. I want to show you. Craig Granowitz has a new watch that's just come out. I just want to show this to you. And he's really working on state of the art, right? State of the art stuff. But Craig wants to jump in, and I'm going to let him because we're friends. But I'm friends with all three of you. But I'm going to let Craig jump in for a second, because a lot of our questions also deal with, we're talking about artificial intelligence, we're talking about big data, and a lot of our questions that are coming in are, hey, people, are we forgetting? Are we missing the people through the forest, right? The forest of data. And Craig, I just want to ask you to speak to that. And MaryAnne, I have a very special question for you coming up. I'm going to share it with you. Actually, I'm going to share it with you, so you can opine and think about it right now, and then we're going to return to Craig for his answer to my question about, hey, what about the people? So MaryAnne, we recognize coming out of COVID, particularly COVID, in my opinion, is not it's not the catalyst for what Medable and what we're doing. I think everybody talked about the need to press forward and develop vaccines quickly. I always think COVID was not the instigator. It was the, oh, I get it now moment. We've been trying to do what Kim and you and others have wanted to do for years upon years, at least a decade, if not longer. So I'm going to ask you the question of where are we going now? I mean, I think we know we need artificial intelligence. I think we know we need to construct different systems. You're chief strategy officer of Medable. Your job is to look around the corner a little bit. I'm going to ask you what's around the corner. Craig, how about us? How about the people? Now, forget about the big. How about the intimate? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think Kim and you really set it up extraordinarily well. To get the patient, and again, I'm going to differentiate between consumer and patient, because I think people put on a totally different hat and are in a completely different space when they are a patient than when they are a consumer. The most important element for a patient is the word trust. And I look at the issue of vaccines as fundamentally an unbelievable science story. As an MD, PhD, and as a research guy, unbelievable story. But you can see the incredible resistance that was created. And put the politics aside, because it's the same in every country, and I don't really want to have a political discussion. But to me, a little knowledge sometimes is a dangerous thing. And people want to have a healthcare provider because they need someone they trust to be their interlocutor, right? They need someone to be their informed educator to help them make decisions where they just can't. My perspective on it when I was in the wards decades ago and watching it myself or with my parents is when you walk into a doctor's office, you can't listen and process because your mind's in a different place. And people are highly resistant. They just don't trust. And so I think that that's sort of one of the fundamental issues. And that's why medicine ultimately is a high touch, high trust business. And I think these big aggregators are just not going to be effective there because they're seen as alien, not part of me, outsiders, scary. Look at, again, the vaccines. I mean, any rational discussion around vaccine is vaccination should be mandatory for everybody, right? I mean, what really is the downside if you look at it from a dispassionate, intellect-only issue? But then when you peel it back, and being the head of the COVID committee at 2 separate companies, I'm back to work. Unless you can talk to each individual where they are, all you create is mistrust, resistance, and actually organizational illness, not organizational health.
That's really critical. You know, I always say we're people first, patients second. We'll all be patients at some point, hopefully much later in our life journey than sooner. But unfortunately, we know people who are invited to become patients not by design early in their lives. And I think we always have to remember humanity's needs and harnessing all this technology for each person who we come in contact with. So thank you for that, Craig. That was a reminder to all of us that while we're thinking big, we should also think intimate and small. And I know that our panel does. MaryAnne, I sort of asked you to look around the corner.
Yeah.
I had the pleasure of working with mega companies to announce their sort of embarking upon acquiring big data. And, you know, in my own little room, I sort of said, big data. People would say, what does big data mean? I said, it means a lot of data. And they said, well, what do we do with this lot of data? I said, that's a big question. You know, Kim and his colleagues went out to answer that question quite effectively. We're going to mine that and understand the puzzle nuances and the interconnectivity among data points and beyond. But you know, Medable and you particularly have had this habit of sort of saying, well, this is the next. So I have a question for you. Beyond artificial intelligence, And to Craig's point, understanding that it's really about humanity, about people. What should I put on my horizon in terms of innovation? And I just want to put a caveat here to
Mm-hmm.
my question and make it hard for all of you. A lot
Bring
of
it
the
on.
yeah, bring it on. A lot of the CEWIT attendees are engineers, they're inventors, they're innovators. They're listening to you because they recognize you're really the guiding lights of where the opportunity lies. So MaryAnne, would you comment in a way that our participants can sort of draw strength from your words?
Yeah, thank you so much for the kind remarks, and my esteemed colleagues just recognizing what we're doing together to transform our verticals to improve the intelligence. It's just incredibly humbling and motivating because I think we're in our domain creating this insights. So I will start from like the top, where there has been I'll call it a movement. You'll see a hashtag of no going back. In the last 22 months during the pandemic, we have realized it was almost like a major POV, like a proof of concept, proof of value, where we had to pressure test and figure out. It's like, by the way, my background's in engineering, went to Stevens Institute of Technology, love the systems
Was
thinking
the boat
background.
was
So,
gone? Was the
you
boat
know,
gone already? Was
yeah. And so
the boat was gone?
it's a tremendous like systems thinking problem. How do we come together in a table to collaborate and partner on an innovation stream that's going to figure out how we could effectively drive the acceleration for the vaccines that are now dispensed, 6 billion doses around the world. This is a tremendous accomplishment. And last week's at the Gallium Foundation was a testimony on how that was done. And so, to answer some of the questions and some of the comments, I'll say the following. Number one, where are we headed? Well, we recognize that many organizations are pledging their honors, right, to figure out ways of creating the insights needed to improve and maybe reduce redundancy. For instance, we have found, with example, decentralized trials, some patients actually preferred to be using digital. One of the things that I do here at Medable is I make sure I talk to patients frequently. I interviewed a patient last week. They were enrolled in a clinical study. They leveraged the data. They were able to give us information about decentralized trials. And that is so key. It's making sure we continue to have their voice as part of the design. So as Craig mentioned, right, there's still this significant impact of making sure there's a human touch. And so whether that human touch is through digital, but it's creating that convenience. Now, to answer your question about where we're going, at Medable, I am a firm believer of being able to create extraordinary results is going to require collaboration to understand how we're each going to uniquely change the way we work. And so this becomes just before this call, I was on a group, basically a partnership collaboration meeting where we had 4 different organizations coming together to think about how do we solve this problem, right? And I'm having more of these discussions on a daily basis, that it's not a siloed conversation. It's not me selling my technology to a pharma company or a CRO. It's like, hey, we recognize there's a transformation opportunity. We are going to figure out, as an example, number one, how do we create more intelligent design so that we're collecting, to Craig's point, the data that's needed to ask that question. So how do we eliminate those redundancies? Within almost every clinical study, there's a protocol amendment, right? Because change happens. And so we recognize that if you think about the end in mind, the data that we need to collect, or if we're having information in siloed applications, some of the stuff that when I was at Oracle is how do we create that seamless interoperability so we're able to use that information up front? So there's intelligent design as one segment. How do we accelerate the startup process? How do we then maintain that relationship with the patient, that there's trust and transparency and understanding? Because our job is also to qualify the right patients for the right study at the right time. That is our obligation. And a clinical trial is a human right? We want to make sure that we open up the population for clinical. We want to make sure that we can improve access and diversity. I'm sure that you may have known the stat that the average time to get to a clinical research, is over 2 hours, right? And so we're trying to figure out what are ways to create that consumer experience, whether a patient trusts the digital version of it, whether they want to go to a retail pharmacy to kind of have that experience. We're creating convenience. We're creating the opportunity to ensure that clinical trials is something that, now that the world is watching, is something that is available to anyone, right? And so we want to make sure we're providing the right education, the right insight. And then I'll say about the data, right? So we collect this data around patients, and we collect this data from our sites to improve the performance, to improve the acceleration, we look at some of these metrics on how do we improve time to database lock for submission readiness? How do we ensure that we've been able to determine some of those data standards, right? All the things that Mr. Kim was sharing about is so important and critical. And I think the last thing I'll say, the exciting thing is just, when I started my career, I spent time both on the commercial and the clinical side, actually, at Merck. When I moved into metadata, it was really around the clinical. When I went to Oracle, it was really around the convergence of data in life sciences and healthcare. And now I get to see the convergence and the gap closing. And I think that's the most incredible, exciting time where we're having conversation with leaders in healthcare, with leaders in clinical. What we need to do is make sure it's very purpose-built. There's clear intent of the outcome. And I think the ability to articulate what problem we are solving, finding that use case so the collaboration is well understood. And then at the end of the day, if we're able to increase some of the current status quo, we want to increase more than 5% of the patient population. We want to increase diversity. We want to increase access. We want to improve retention. We want to improve the experience. If we're able to do that right for the patients, I think we're going to have interesting data, right? Yeah. Because we're going to get the permission from patients to continue to work with us.
There. I want to shift over right now to Dr. Branson for just a moment, and then over to Craig. So, Kim, you're charged with taking all this information that Dr. Rizk, MaryAnne, has been talking about, and sort of utilizing it for a distinct, as Craig said, a distinct purpose. And I wanted to ask you an unusual question, which is not just the challenge of having to assemble more than 100 people around the world and harness their talents, the information. I'd be curious if you would share, you probably work with a lot of external partners as well. What would you advise those external partners to be thinking about in order to be sort of like of stronger value and use to you at GSK? If you were to sort of say to all your partners at a partners meeting, in a big room, you step onto the main stage, you have the lavalier mic on and all that, and you're sort of giving them guidance to pull them together as a community, supporting your team's efforts. What would be your counsel to them?
Sure. So, I guess ironically, we don't actually work with a lot of external partners, the AI team. And I'll tell you why. I'd say that 90% of the incoming pitches I get are, I've got some smart people, give me all your data, I'll build something awesome for you. And by the way, can you give me money too? So I'm basically giving you money twice. I'm giving you money in the form of data you can't buy, that's cost us millions of dollars to Craig's point to generate, or other types of things. And I'm also helping you build a product and you're going to sell it back to me. I've got data, I've got smart people, and I've got capital. So you're not giving me anything I don't have, right? So what you actually have to give me is data I can't buy. You've got a different technology to generate data at scale. Data, or do you know a secret? Do you know data that actually unlocks something else? And have you demonstrated that, right? So I tell people building startups, like, don't waste your time pitching big pharma. They almost have a mirror function for everything you do. Unless you've got the champion there, they brought you in, someone's brought you in, they're going to pilot you to death and fight you. Go to someone else who actually wants that, and like you can bring them something new to the table, right? Also, define really well what success looks like. If this works over this hurdle, right? Like define that ahead of time. Like what is the success criteria, rather than playing shifting goalposts. So for us, it's actually, we go out looking for people that are generating different types of data. You've got brain organoids and things like that, with feedback loops, things that we can't do at scale or have something unique, right? maybe they're a way of doing, what is the RNA-seq for whole proteomics? There are companies working on this sort of thing with Aptimus and things like that. That allows us, those are technologies we can bring in and generate different types of data for us. So that is really the conversation, right? It's actually, you're convincing a big company that, by the way, all this data, the clinical data you generate, is extremely valuable. It's not something you can buy, right? It's a unique asset. And the company is sort of waking up to that sort of fact that, like, this is actually something that's really unique. We also are on the hunt for data for these different types of things, because if we choose to build an algorithm, try and build something, we build medicines for everybody. We also have to build algorithms for everybody. But right now, we do have massive disparities in terms of whose data is represented in a digital form, right? And I guess MaryAnne's helping to solve that. But right now, like, I could build all these great algorithms, but if your data is in a hospital system where I can deploy it easily and that changes dramatically over the world, we have a challenge. Like, we have an ethical right where we can't just say, oh, I built the system, it works really well for white dudes. Sorry, I just didn't have those other people in my data set. Right? It's not good enough, right? You actually have to collect it before you start, or do your best faith effort and find out to do that, right? And it will have differential performance because of those biases. But you need to understand, like, is it enough to be over the line, right? So we have fellows now that do ethical research into some of these things. Just for our point about vaccines, right? Do we need the equivalent of data cold chain? Should we be investing that as industries, right? To be able to complete that in other countries. So those are some of the areas. And I think that's probably, those sorts of things are where partnership and things matters, thinking about the deployment and using these things, less on the construction and things like that, right? But more about, so it's data to build those types of models, to allow you to build those things at scale, right?
Thank you for that. That was, by the way, that's sort of information, the good and the bad, you can take away to the bank. By the way, the most frequent question, wait a second, I want to get back to Craig on that question. Hold on to your thought. I know you were probably sitting in the first row of elementary school there, MaryAnne. Me.
I was.
You are, because you have the information.
That's so predictive. You don't even need AI for that.
Knowing the three of you, all three of you were like in that seat in front of the teacher.
With my big glasses and my braces.
Kim was probably saying, wait a minute, I could teach this class. But in any event, the most frequent question I'm being asked as moderator is, where can I get this recording? This is awesome. So I wanted the three of you to know that. The other question I'm being asked is, can I get individual pictures of the speakers? I'm looking at this and get their autographs. Yes, you can do that. You can reach them. You can reach them on LinkedIn, and they will. I'm certainly. These are the superstars of artificial intelligence and drug development. So I'm certain they would welcome your connection on LinkedIn. I think the three of you are on LinkedIn. So by all means, take advantage of the connection and continue the conversation. So Craig, I wanted to go back to you for just a moment, and you have really dealt with sort of magnificent. You've overcome magnificent challenge in drug development throughout your career, on the oncology side, on the cardiology side, and so forth. I wanted you to reflect on the times where you did not have the advantage of big data or artificial intelligence, and you had to really punch through and make decisions. Could you reflect on the same situation today of how artificial intelligence, how if you had Kim's team at your right side, what would have been different?
I'm not sure I would have made some of the risk decisions that were the most important value creating decisions in my career.
You were fortunate. Shearing, Merck, and Amron were very fortunate that you have the gift of pattern recognition.
But to me, Gil, that is exactly the point. Is you create value as an entrepreneur where other people have not fully valued a market. The only way that you create value is either through sweat or through better execution. And I can think back, every single major drug that I've seen is a discontinuity by definition, because it was where people did not value and misvalued an asset. That is where the most value is created. So every single major blockbuster I've been on has come as a discontinuity, not as a linear progression. And that to me sums up biology, it sums up entrepreneurship, and it sums up success in many cases in life. is that I think there is an issue, a difference between the spark of insight and true value creation and value realization. I think all the things we talked about here are about how do you accelerate value realization. But the value creation is cutting against the herd. It is making the decision where everyone else says, you're crazy, you're stupid, you're a fool. And I think if big data can help you say either, I know I'm right, I'm not crazy, or yeah, you know what, you are right, I am crazy sooner, and then bring forward those where I know I'm right, I'm going to get there faster than everybody else. That's how you create breakthroughs in innovation. Just one quick analogy is the automobile never would have been invented to solve the problem in the 1870s as New York City was drowning in horse manure, right? What people were inventing is a better way to pick up horse manure. No one ever thought about an automobile. And to me, that can never come out of big data. Can't. It only comes out of the insight and the spark of an idea. And I think all of the things we talked about today are how do you bring that spark to consolidation, to realization, to knowledge, to reality. But that spark is to go against the grain.
Thank you, Craig. That is brilliant. Now, we have a few moments left, and I want to ask each of you sort of a final pointed question. Before I do that, I want to again extend my thanks to the CEWIT staff who have organized this conference, this two-day gathering. And I've attended this in person. I look forward to attending in person in the future. Hundreds of people come from all around the world. We have hundreds of people listening into this conversation today from around the world. They're enjoying three amazing panelists, global experts in the field of drug development and artificial intelligence and drug discovery. I want to thank our three panelists. I want to thank, of course, the organizer of this panel who brought us together, Mr. Levi Shapiro, who's an ambassador for health innovation around the world. And of course, the conference originator and conference chair, Dr. Shmuel Aniv, for his groundbreaking work, not only in the science of cardiovascular care and innovation that is saving today really, or information that's resulting in saving millions of lives, but for his vision of understanding that a gathering of engineers who are dedicated to wireless information technology would really be the foundation for innovations that we've been talking about during this conversation. So I want to ask my last question of the panelists. By the way, I have been told that this session will be available on recording. It will be shared. I look forward to receiving it and viewing it again and again. I attend many conferences all around the world. I know that Dr. Rizk and I leave for next week. We're attending a conference also dealing with the future of drug discovery and drug development that we look forward to rubbing shoulders with, sort of luminaries like those that are on this panel today. But my last question for you is this. If we could compress everything we've talked about and everything you experienced and talk about artificial intelligence as a must organize around and apply for the sake of humanity. In other words, I've never felt artificial intelligence was in place of humanity's greatest gifts, which is to make decisions. But if we understood artificial intelligence is a must embed in drug discovery and drug development, what would be your guiding advice to our listeners today and to all those who will see this recording? What would be your guiding advice for people who have to recognize artificial intelligence is not a question, it's not an option, it's a given. Now what? What's your big takeaway? Really, let me start with Dr. Branson. Kim, your thoughts, please.
Well, I think, look, we're just seeing an evolution of what we've been doing, right? You can think of, like Pierre Louis Elderman, right, who was originally collecting data on bloodletting and leeches for recovery from pneumonia, right? We've been looking at data and trying to make predictions and doing this in medicine since we started, right? I think it's a tool, and there's some great things about the new modern neural networks, which become synonymous with AI, that allows you to borrow strength and transfer things across different data. I think what it means is collecting data is really important. collecting all the metadata about things and thinking, as I'm collecting something right now, what more can I collect for the marginal cost, right? So that future me can actually do something faster and, to Craig's point, actually play what if. Actually, I've got an idea. Can I look this up? Can I get a hint to work out the experiment? That's what it allows you to do, right? It allows you to build that what if machine. And that, so think about future you, build data for the future, and don't do one-off things, right? Try and build a continuous data stream. That's my advice.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kim. And thank you again for your early rise today and also sharing your household last evening. It was a pleasure to meet your son. And I think that the world of science will be in good hands. I can tell from his inquisitive questions. Dr. Granowitz, Craig, your thoughts, please.
I think it's very simple. We can, I think, summarize the last nearly hour and a half, close to 2 hours, in one simple phrase, which is you need to take away how to use the tools, not let the tools use you. And I think as real content experts, all of us, whether we're an engineer or a biologist, we were honed to think we are a certain way of thinking. But again, just I'll reiterate it, use the tool, don't let the tools use you.
Thank you, Craig. And I think that having seen you in those closed boardrooms again and again, I know that you have used the wisdom of data, of big data, of artificial intelligence, listening to clinicians, listening to the voice of the patient. And then ultimately, as you said earlier, it's about someone in charge making a decision based upon good information. And I think that you've done that. I want to thank you for your participation. And Dr. Rizk, MaryAnne, first of all, thank you so much for jumping in, your groundbreaking work. It's always it's a pleasure to share a virtual stage with you or a physical space with you. I want to thank you. You've always been candid with people who have asked you questions. I ask for your candor right now. What do we have to consider when we're looking at not the question of artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence is not on trial here. It is innocent. It doesn't have to be proven guilty. It's pure. It's data. We need it. We need it. We need a Kim Branson in every company around the world with his energy and also his bobblehead figures. That helps as well. But MaryAnne, you've seen it from the CRO standpoint. You've seen it from the industry standpoint. What's the big takeaway for our audience today?
So I firmly believe, and with some of the evidence I put in the chat, that we are moving towards a era in the industry where there is science not only for measuring the efficacy for patients, but leveraging insights and intelligence. And so the recent publication from the FDA, the guidance on the AL/ML action
which you
plan,
put in the chat, by the way.
I just put it in the chat.
Everybody
so you
running
go ahead,
that before this
download
disappears.
it. It was released earlier this year. There were some other updates, but now you see, right, that this has been a call to action for the industry, regardless of your area, whether you're a sponsor, CRO, technology company, recognizing that we're all coming together. Again, my theme about collaborations and partnerships couldn't be more real, right? This is happening on Capitol Hill. We recognize that we need to also articulate very clearly with digital therapeutics and other areas, right, that we're using the unstructured data, structured data, de-identified data, all to make sure that we're improving the insights, intelligence to ensure we have safe and effective drugs out in the marketplace. So never has been there a time. If you're in the audience and you're an engineer, a scientist, a data manager, I see some folks that actually are. This is an area where we're going to continue to invest in technologies, in digitalization, to ensure there's a consumer grade experience. So when we're talking to patients and we're talking to the ring of organizations around the patients, those clinicians, right? Those digital clinicians, even investigators are being part of this decentralized process. And it's just so exciting. So I will say that AI and ML is something that we are bringing to the table as machine with human, and that we're also learning, and it's just an evolution for us. Not only that we're making an impact, but we're creating more intelligence, and hopefully a great qualitative lagging indicator for the success that we're doing is that we have some really inclusive medicine for precision medicine, that we have more patients that we're having care and treatments, right? And so that's just very exciting and humbling as part of what we're doing. So those are going to be my final remarks, and folks will might enjoy some of the information published by the FDA.
Thank you, MaryAnne. Thank you so much. Kim, thank you. Craig, thank you. To our organizers, thank you. Again, our speakers are on LinkedIn. Some of them are on Twitter. Their companies are on Twitter, certainly. I invite you to follow them all. I also want to acknowledge the fact that CEWIT is an amazing community of people from around the world. I want to thank again our organizers and the people behind the team, the technical folks who put this together, the administrative folks, everybody who's made CEWIT possible. Our thanks to them. To our speakers, our panelists, again, my humble appreciation. Thank you so very much for your candor, your direction, your counsel. I wish everyone be healthy. Take care.
Excellent job, Gil. Great job moderating. Fantastic.
Great panelists make for great conversation, right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Take
guys.
care, everybody.